Welcome to the special Halloween edition of the Smartest People in the Room. We are glad you are here, and just by showing up today, you're already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I'm pleased to present two people who are longtime friends, former colleagues, and are both scary smart. See what I did there? I promise you will leave smarter and more enlightened than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some business. First, to the audience, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat window. The reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people in the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I am a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So as an example, I represent companies like the two that these guys work for, and I put guys like them in senior jobs at both of those companies. So by definition and function, I help people like you connect with companies like this. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the session. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address everyone, not just the host and speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors for about their support. We could not do this for free. Special thanks to First Horizon Bank, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, Tennessee Brew Works, Better Than Booze, and MedJet. So let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome Chris Dalla Riva. Chris is a senior product manager at AudioMac, where he works on all things data and personalization. During his tenure, he's helped build a variety of tools to help artists, labels, and curators better understand how their music is performing, along with developing AudioMac's algorithmically curated songs and playlists. Outside of work, Chris has been releasing music and playing in bands for the better part of 15 years. He's also a prominent voice on the intersection of music and data. His work has been featured by NPR, The Economist, and Business Insider, among many other publications. He boasts over 100,000 followers on TikTok and 6,000 newsletter subscribers, where he regularly talks about the weird world of music and data. His original claim to fame was starting off an internet-wide debate about the decline of key changes in popular music. Dave, we've got to explore that topic with him today, okay?
Yes, absolutely on the list.
And joining Chris as today's featured guest is Dave Edwards. Dave is the SVP of Revenue and Operations at Warner Records in LA. As a lifelong music fanatic and professional, Dave has seen the industry evolve over the past 23 years through his time as a major label intern, music producer, writer, and music tech executive. After a production career that produced viral remixes and releases on Republic, Atlantic, Island, Big Beat, and other top labels, Dave joined AudioMac in 2014 as the company's first non-founder employee. As CRO at AudioMac, Dave helped lead the company's revenue strategy and expansion into over 125 international markets and over 250 million app downloads, in addition to accolades such as Fast Company's Most Innovative Companies in Music. Dave's expertise in monetization and ad tech has been featured in Ad Age, Ad Exchanger, Liftoff Mobile Heroes, and more. His writing and research has appeared in Andreessen Horowitz's Future Water and Music, and his own newsletter on music and technology called Above the API, where he writes about the myriad ways technology is changing and shaping both the future of music and society at large. It is my pleasure to welcome these two rock stars to our platform today. Take it away, boys.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
So Tom touched on a couple things so first off, I have to kind of set the table for everyone who's tuning in. And if you are here, thank you very much for taking some of your day to chat with us. One of my favorite things about knowing Chris that I tease him about periodically is that he really like undersells his podcast resume. Like I think they just mentioned The Economist and Business Insider, but it's not infrequent that I will like be at the gym, turn on my podcast player and Chris just like is in my headphones because he's on, NPR or the Economist podcast or some massive show. So I think the only one I haven't heard you on so far is the Daily. I think that's the one you still have left on your
Yeah,
list.
yeah. The New York Times is it's a hard wall to crack.
Yeah. But yeah, as Tom mentioned, Chris and I until very recently worked together at AudioMac. Chris is still there, and I just joined the Warner Records team in LA. And yeah, Chris is really genuinely one of my favorite people I've met in the music biz. Incredibly smart. Has a really rare combination of the ability to dive into data and do really advanced analyses, but also to present those and frame those in a way that is extremely digestible and understandable to non-technical or non kind of data or math majors at the company, which is a really rare skill set in my experience. Often it's kind of one or the other, but I think that's why he's had so much traction with his Substack and his writing in general. So yeah, just very stoked to be chatting the music biz with one of my favorite folks in it.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Dave, for the warm words. I feel like the one thing that drives me always is that at the end of the day, I just love songs. I love music. I love going to shows, and that was something I feel like I initially connected with you about is your initial interest in the business is you're an artist, and
Yeah.
I'm curious how over the last what 2 decades your thought about artistry has changed as you have moved throughout, from curating music at Audio Mac to working on the ads team to now going to Warner, how your perspective on artistry has changed.
Yeah, especially if the time frame is it's crazy to think this, but I'm 39 now and my first internship was when I was 16, so 23 years. I can't believe it's been that long. It makes me feel very old. But um yeah, I mean, if the time horizon is 20-ish years, I mean, the change has been drastic. So drastic that when I got into the music business, initially as an intern, I never had any concept of being an artist. And that was because the ability to make a professional quality record on your laptop on Ableton or FL Studio or Logic and programs like that just really wasn't a thing when I was in high school. I was in high school from 99 to 2003, and Logic and Cubase and some of those programs they were around then, but it was just different. Like you didn't hear about kids going home from school and making beats like a lot of house producers do now. So I never really thought about being an artist when I kind of started working in the music business. I'd always been pretty obsessed with music. I used to have like a parlor trick that I would do for house guests when I was growing up, where I could recite the track list and the duration down to the second of like pretty much any CD that my parents had. So, Billy Joel and Aerosmith. Most people really weren't that interested, which in hindsight makes sense, but I thought it was very cool at the time. But yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up playing instruments or anything like that, but I was just always kind of laser focused on music. And so when I was growing up, I really wanted to be an A&R. I wasn't thinking about being an artist again because back then, and I think this was an accurate conception at the time, I really just thought of it as, hey, I need a room full of expensive equipment to make a really great record. You need, a Triton keyboard and a, tape deck and mixing console and all this other stuff. And, suffice it to say that that has changed completely in the past 20 years. So, fast forward from say, 1999 to 2009, and I was, starting to produce records and remixes, on my laptop. So, yeah, I mean that it's an obvious one, but that has been the biggest change. And Chris, this is something that you and I think write and talk a lot about is just the explosion in the number of people making music and putting music out. And it is one of those metrics that is a little hard to quantify, right? Because there was no way to track, say, in the 90s or 80s, how many people would sit at the piano at home and just noodle around. So it's an imprecise science, I think, to try to measure that directly. But I think we all know a lot of musicians, sitting in this room, and whether they are full time or it's a hobby, That is just such a drastic change. And, you know, obviously that has, I think there's great parts about that. And it also inherently presents some challenges for artists now. The most obvious being that, you know, I think instead of competing, if you want to think of it as a competition, which I understand some don't, but if you're trying to get attention compared to all the other people putting out music in the same day or week as you, there's a lot there's a lot of other folks raising their hands trying to get those playlists and that attention. So it's kind of two sides of a coin, right? The great part is that anyone can make music even without a laptop now. You can make music on your phone. And I think we'll see that tech get even better and better over, you know, the next few years. So anyone can make music. Anyone can put it out, as I think anyone who's listening to this knows, you know, you can go to TuneCore or DistroKid and just get a song out everywhere very quickly. Or, you know, use a platform like YouTube or SoundCloud or AudioMac and just upload it the second it's done. But the flip side is that it's, you know, it's becoming increasingly hard, I think, to stand out in that crowd of people making music. So and that was something that I saw, you know, in my career as a producer. You know, over time, it was just, for me personally, it became really hard to keep up with the algorithm. I mean, to just kind of put it the most direct way I can, I just found that, um, you know, to stay relevant, to keep people interested in what you were doing, you just had to put out so much music because there was so much other music coming out that the minute you would release something, if you didn't have something out 2 weeks later, people just forget about it. So for me, that became really challenging, both because I was definitely too much of a perfectionist in the studio, but also, you know, as I started working at AudioMac full time and I was still producing, I just had less time, so I couldn't keep up with my peers who were still doing it full time. So yeah, there's definitely, you know, I think good and bad parts to it, but I do think it's an amazing thing that anyone can make music now, and that's just been the largest change that I've seen, you know, in my time in the industry.
Yeah, I always think about what has had the bigger impact, the democratization of creator tools, you know, your Logic Pros or your Pro Tools, or just the declining cost of distribution. I mean, distribution, to me, it's effectively commodified now.
Yeah,
I feel like so many independent distributors, and some of them have there's a little bit different offering, but for the most part, it's like the same thing. You're paying however many dollars a year to get your music on every platform. One distributor I was just on just shut down, so I had just moved over to DistroKid, and it's like, all right, it's the same exact thing. I'm just, it's just on a different server, and
yeah.
I feel like that we're still grappling with that fact that if it were just easy to make music, but it was still hard to get it distributed, we'd be living in a very different world. But the distribution costs are just so cheap from, you know, 20 years ago. I mean, 40 years ago, it's not even comparable.
Definitely. And, you know, I think what's interesting is, you know, as more people enter the music making arena, and to your point, get their music on Spotify and Apple Music and all these different services, it's also interesting for me to think about how even just that part of it has changed over the years. Because when I was really kind of starting to take off a bit as an artist, it was a different era. I mean, Spotify had launched in the US. I mean, I started to kind of get some label placements and make some noise around 2014. So Spotify was here, they were in the US. It was definitely growing, but it was so different than it is today, where, you know, a couple of large streaming services just kind of effectively own the music streaming business. It was still very diversified as far as where people were listening, and the point of discovery was quite diverse. So I had a lot of traction on Hype Machine, which used to roll up all the, you know, kind of editorial music blogs, and that was where a lot of kind of electronic and house producers, you know, that I was kind of alongside in that era, you know, got their start. The Chainsmokers, I think, really got signed off of, you know, Hype Machine Traction, and I think Kygo maybe as well. So, you know, it was this kind of amazing discovery tool. And you know, as an artist, I mean, you could get on there. You could email editors at blogs, and I mean, I would send out 500 emails, and I'd consider myself lucky if I got, you know, two yeses out of those. So that was a
Mm.
good sales training. I expect a lot of no's, but yeah, and obviously like that's just changed so much. Now so much of discovery is driven by streaming, and where it's not, it's driven by large social platforms like TikTok, like Instagram Reels, like YouTube Shorts. And I think one of the things that I kind of realized for myself as an artist is I wasn't as good at TikTok and Shorts as I was at the hype machine stuff. And so I think as an artist, you have to just understand those changes. Because, again, even just looking at the past 10 years, that's been a huge shift that I've seen. It's rare that I will go to a music blog anymore. And that's no shade at blogs. It's just that point of discovery has just changed. So it's less a part of my kind of day to day. So it's also interesting to just kind of see, to your point, Chris, like how discovery changes, like not just the number of people making music, but how you can hopefully raise your hand as an artist.
Yeah, I'm always curious because the over the last 20 years, especially the mode of discovery has changed so much. And what are artists able to do to transcend that, where people who were big in the blog era are still able to get listeners in the TikTok era that we live in, the streaming era that we live in now. And the thing that I always go back to, it always seems old fashioned. It's like your ability to build a community around your music. And if you have that, it doesn't really seem to matter what the platform is or where people are listening or discovering music. It's like the same old fashioned thing. Is there's just a community of people who like what you do and will come out to see you.
For sure. That's always the most important thing. I'm looking at some of the questions in the chat. One from Matt, which is there too much music out there? That's something that Chris and I have talked about a lot, kind of offline. Um, I personally, I try not to see it as too much music because I think that I think it's awesome that anyone can make music. I think that that's just such a change from when I was growing up. I think that where I try to counsel artists is just and this is always a fine line because you want to encourage someone to pursue their passion and follow their dream. And the music industry is filled with stories of people who were just on the precipice of having that breakthrough when they were, most seriously thinking about quitting. I'm pretty sure I read a Calvin Harris interview years ago where he was saying literally like the month that he got signed to Sony, I think he was working at a grocery store stocking shelves and was kind of like this is it. Like music is not going to work out. Um, and he became one of the biggest producers of all time. So it's always a balance, but I do try to, when I talk to artists and they ask for advice, you just need to be cognizant, I think, of how many other people are making music, and that it is going to be a challenge to stand out in that crowd. It can definitely be done. It takes an incredible amount of hard work, but anyone who tells you it's going to be easy is probably trying to sell you something. So it is really hard. But I think it was also in a different way. I think it was really hard in the '90s and the '80s. I mean, there were plenty of people who wanted record deals and never got them. So I think that's always been a challenge. It may look a little different now, but I think again, this is something that's, common sense to everyone here, but making music is a really hard way to make a living. Making any type of art is a really hard way to make a living. So, I try to just, when I talk to artists, help folks understand that, it's going to be hard, but there are ways to do it.
Yeah, and there are these numbers floated around a lot. It's like, oh, Spotify's ingesting 100,000 releases every day or something.
I
I
think the
think
last I saw, sorry to interrupt, the last I saw a few months ago was 300,000.
I mean, it
It's pretty
boggles the
crazy.
mind. You got to think that's more releases in a matter of a couple days than you probably would see across an entire decade, like 60 years ago. But I think the important context is there are probably a lot of people who upload one song and then never upload music ever again. I think it's important to contextualize that with being like, it's not like it's 300,000 people who are releasing multiple pieces of music every year. And that doesn't mean what they're putting out isn't serious or doesn't have the chance to be listened to. Um, But if you are, again, you used the word before, competing to make a career out of this, it is also probably a smaller pool. And I don't think we should get mad about the fact that it's a more democratic process that anyone can release and distribute something. That's we probably
Yeah.
discover more people get a chance who wouldn't if you had to go through jump through all the hoops that you would have had to a couple decades ago.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, when we kind of zoom out and sorry, just to add a couple of stats to what we were just discussing. So the last I saw, I believe somewhere around 30 to 33%, call it a third of songs that are on Spotify have never been played once. So to your point, there's a lot of stuff ending up there. That's also a big discussion in the industry right now. I think a lot of that pool is probably, rain sounds and sleep sounds and things like that. That's been a big kind of point of contention. But yes, to your point, not everything that ends up on streaming is necessarily someone full time putting their all into music, releasing a bunch of songs. And yeah, as far as volume, like I said, last I heard 300,000 songs a day. That was a few months ago. So by now it's probably like 350 or something. The best comparison that I have is that in the year of 2000, around 1.5 million songs came out that entire year.
Oh my
So
God.
if we're moving at 300,000 a day, you're talking, yeah, under a week now, you have more music coming out than in a year, a couple decades ago. And I think I'm sure we'll touch on AI pretty soon, but I think there's reasons to think that daily song number may really get inflated, quite a bit over the next few years. So, yeah, it's hard, but the long tail is very long, and that's something that we both, I think, talk about and write about a lot. So I try, I think as an artist, I wouldn't worry too much about the 300,000 songs coming out every day. To Chris's point, if you are able to connect with even a small group of fans, that can be the basis for either, a passion project that you find rewarding or, even a full-time career. So I would try not to focus too much on that number because I do think it can be kind of misleading again with
Yeah,
with a third of those songs not even getting a play.
yeah. So the last time I spoke to you, we were colleagues. I guess we're still colleagues. We were coworkers, but now
Yes.
you're at Warner. I want to know what's gone on in the last month. What's been the hardest thing to learn? What's been the same?
Yeah, it's been fantastic. I will, in case Warner HR is watching, I am required to say that I'm expressing my own personal opinions today, nothing on behalf of my employer. No, it's been awesome. I obviously miss AudioMac tremendously. I was there for 10 years and, just had the good fortune of seeing, what started as a website turn into, an app with a quarter billion downloads and, so that was an incredible journey. But yeah, Warner's been amazing so far. The team is great. I obviously can't kind of discuss too much of what's going on business wise, but it's been a great kind of change of pace for me, and it's definitely been interesting. I was obviously an intern when I started my career, so I'll use career loosely in those years, but yeah, the industry and labels have changed so much, obviously, in 23 years. I mean, when I started interning, it was before Napster hit. I mean, it was right when Napster. My first internship was at Def Jam when I was 16, so that was 2001. So I mean, Napster was operating then, and it was definitely starting to kind of, you heard people talking about this new file sharing thing, but the financial fallout had not been felt yet. That didn't start, at least just going off memory, until 2004, 2005. I was interning at that point at Sony, and that was just a crazy time in the industry. It sounds ludicrous to say now, but I mean, people were just discussing, are there even going to be major labels in a few years? I mean, it was that dire because the revenue was just cratering. Obviously things are in a much different place now, but the industry will always have challenges, right? I mean, there's always going to be new technology, and maybe that is a good segue if we want to talk about AI and some of the stuff facing the industry at the moment. There's a lot of takeaways for me from the Napster era, but I think the most fundamental is that you cannot put technology back in a box. You can try as hard as you want, but that's a losing fight every time. So that doesn't mean we always have to love how things are changing, but I do think we need to be honest about how they're changing. And plan and be proactive. To Glenn's point in the chat, I agree. I was really happy to see, the labels taking a tough stance, against some of these AI companies that have raised a lot of money. And I'm not anti-AI. I honestly, when I think, I don't make music right now. I wish I had more time. But I'm interested in making music again for the first time in a while because of some of the AI tools I'm seeing. And to clarify, I don't mean the stuff that's like push a button and it makes the whole song for you. There's no creative interest, there to me. But to be candid, I mean, my weakness as a producer was I wasn't good at playing guitar. I couldn't sing. I couldn't, and especially when you're doing like house music, electronic music, you're very often a one-person band. Like you kind of have to do everything. You're not usually in a group. I mean, there are groups, but it's more common, to kind of be a solo artist. And the hardest part for me was finding a great vocalist for a beat that I had fully built out, or finding, procuring an amazing guitar part for a track I was working on. And I knew exactly what I wanted in my head, but I just couldn't play it. So, there's tools now that are changing those things, which is incredibly exciting as long as they are opt-in, as long as creators have licensed their work to them and it's voluntary and those creators are getting paid, great. But yes, to Glenn's point, I think the idea that anyone would start a business predicated upon, scraping a bunch of work from other people and then being surprised that, copyright may come into play is kind of wild to me. So, I think that, I hope the industry, and I think so far I've been pretty encouraged to see the industry taking a pretty proactive stance. Definitely different than during the file sharing days where they kind of let it get out of hand before they then tried to come in and, sue individuals and stuff that probably wasn't going to really change anything. But it's very tough. And I feel really strongly that a lot of the training that's going on without license or permission would go against the spirit of, fair use or copyright law. But I'm not a judge and I'm not an attorney, so I don't know. I've talked to a lot of attorneys about this, and there are divergent opinions. And so I think that's going to be a real kind of moment of truth for our industry as some of this stuff goes to court. Is what is going to be ruled fair use. Cass, to your point, I'm not sure if you're saying this or not, but I I would strongly argue that if unauthorized training is not a violation of copyright law, that it should be, and that needs to be changed. But it's going to be a really interesting few years.
Yeah, totally. And I don't see a way where this doesn't shake out where artists can't be compensated for the usage of their intellectual property, even if it's just being fed into some model. And I think there are some companies that are working on exciting things that are will be beneficial for artists. Someone you and I both know, Michael Pelchinski, he worked at SoundCloud, but now he's working for this company, Voice Swap, where
Yeah,
artists can license their voices, a model can be trained on it, and people can use that voice directly in their DAW, so Logic or FL Studio. Um, but it's all built around artist permissioning, where the artist is getting compensated for the usage of their voice, even if it's just in a session you're working on. It doesn't have to be released. And at any moment, the artist can also revoke your ability to use their voice. And he said they even have permissions around what people can use to make your voice say or sing. So if you're a vegetarian
yeah.
and you don't want people singing about I don't know, hamburgers.
Chick-fil-A. Yeah,
Yeah,
no
they
Chick-fil-A
can
anthems.
they can detect what's going on and what you're actually singing about with their voice. Um, and I hope that that's how this ends up going. Like you said, it's you can't really put it back in the box after a certain point. And I'm always cautious because every technological change in the last 100 years, you will see people saying it's like the death of music. Everything from recording itself to radio to drum machines. So I don't want to be a Luddite about this, but I do think we need to put safeguards in place and we need to make sure that artists are compensated. It's not, I saw someone joke the other day. It's like if you steal one song, it's copyright infringement. If you steal them all, it's fair use. Like that's obviously
Yeah,
that can't be a way the industry can go forward. And I'm not the judge or jury here, so we'll have to see how this shakes out. But I think in the next couple of years, the legal landscape around this is going to change pretty dramatically. Because
Yeah.
it's
And
just it's going to change. I mean, there's no two ways about it.
yeah, I'm just writing some notes because I definitely have a couple of thoughts. Yeah, I agree. I think three kind of things to jump off from what you were just saying that I find interesting. Um, to your point, it is interesting seeing this debate because I vividly remember that transition that I talked about where you needed a full studio full of gear to, oh wow, I can make a record on Ableton on my laptop. There was a lot of discussion. I would hang out on like music production forums as I was getting into it, and there was a lot of discussion about, hey, if you use Ableton or Logic or Pro Tools, like you're not a musician. Like this is you should be there with the guitar and the 8 track. And I also totally concede that it's not one to one. Those apps were not trained off of copyrighted data, so I'm not taking one side or the other there. But that discussion, to your point, Chris, comes up repeatedly, and I do think that the AI one is intrinsically more important just because of the kind of nature of what it is and that it can kind of self-generate and replicate content. But no, that is definitely a thing, and that was something that I saw as I was starting to produce. um Touching on, kind of the silliness of copyright at the moment, or not copyright necessarily, but I think some of the approaches that we're seeing in the AI space. The thing that I always come back to with this is I was raised by a mom who always stressed the golden rule to me, treat others how you want to be treated. And you don't see, in my opinion, really any of the AI companies that we probably think of when we think of AI right now doing that. What I mean by that is that without naming any companies, um, I cannot go to huge tech company A and train a model off of their model weights and then say, hey, this is my fair use of your model and I'm going to commercialize it and make billions of dollars. They would sue you on day one, and it's in their terms of service that you can't do that.
Yeah,
But that is exactly what they are doing with music and the written word and all kinds of other content. So that's where it just doesn't square up to me is, if you want to protect your hard work, but you don't want to value the hard work of others, I have a hard time kind of accepting that. The one other thing that I would call out that I think is really interesting and very different from the Napster era is AI is kind of it's coming for everyone right now. It may hit software engineers or writers or illustrators first, but I don't think there's anyone in any job who isn't at least to some extent nervous about being automated by AI in the next couple decades. And the reason I mentioned that is, I recall from the Napster era, public sentiment, as far as I could tell, was very pro file sharing. I mean, it was just,
yeah,
let's be honest, a lot of people who didn't value music or who didn't want to pay 17.99 for a CD were like, this is incredible. Why wouldn't I just take music from a file sharing service? You're seeing something very different, in my opinion, with opinion polling and public sentiment on AI. You're seeing the opposite, which is the majority of Americans are very concerned about it, and they don't think that creators should have their work taken without license or permission. So I am optimistic about that. I think that is really different than some of the challenges we've had in the past. But to many of the comments in the chat, I don't want to rely on that public sentiment because that's not the same as having laws and rules in place. But I do think that may be one reason for optimism, that a lot of people who never saw themselves, again, during the Napster days, I don't think if you were a doctor, you didn't worry about a file sharing service, coming for your job. It was just a fun thing to get free music. Now I think if you're thinking about AI and you're in healthcare or literally any job, you're reading articles every day about how some doctor was just replaced by AI that's more accurate. So I do think that's a good thing. But that's not to say that we should rely on that or consider it a victory by any means.
totally. To turn to a different topic, this is something you and I have talked about before, and now that you're at the labels, I'm curious what your perspective is. Over the last year or 2 years, there were all these pieces about the death of the superstar, that labels didn't know how to make superstars anymore, that everything was being broken apart. And, however many years ago, everyone liked Elvis Presley or the Beatles, but we don't have those cultural monoliths anymore. Um, I believe you and I are in general opinion that this was overstated. And just as a jumping off point here, before this, I went and looked at the Billboard Hot 100 this week. And of course, I just looked at like the top 20 songs. Of course, there are people who have been around for a decade or have been established stars like Morgan Wallen, Billie Eilish, Bruno Mars, Lady Gaga. But also in that same list, there are people who have really just emerged as superstars in the last few years, like Shabuzi, Sabrina Carpenter, Benson Boone, Chappell Roan. Um, I guess my
Zach
question is,
Bryan, I gotta plug a little Warner repertoire here.
yes, no,
Yeah,
Zach, I mean, he is a superstar. I won't, of course, everyone like, oh, it's not like the Michael Jackson level of fame, but almost no one reaches that. And who knows in a couple of years if he could be. The industry, my question, the industry is different in that there aren't these centralized levers to pull, like, oh, we'll just put your video in rotation on MTV. And it seems like we're still trying to figure out how to break stars in this new era. But I don't, I think it's clear that there is still new music breaking through. And I'm sure that you see that in just your short time at Warner.
yeah. Yeah, no, as you said, we've talked about this a lot offline. I know we've planned to write a piece on this, which I have totally dropped the ball on with the job pivot over the past couple months, but I still very much want to do that because I would really love to dig into the data on this with you, and you're the perfect person to do that. So we'll do that in the new year or next month. But yeah, and again, I'm not married to one side of this argument. I'm willing to be proven wrong when we dig into the data. But my just, kind of high level view of this at the moment is I think it's a few different factors. I'm very skeptical that there are fewer superstars now than there were when I was growing up in the 90s. For one, I think that we always reminisce about things being different in the past. Oh, things were so much better when I was, growing up, or things like that. And as best I can remember, 20 years later, there were not tons of new superstars emerging every year in the late 90s. I mean, there would be one or two. There'd be a Britney Spears or an NSYNC or a huge hip hop artist like Jay-Z, but there were not. I don't recall a period where there were just superstars sprouting up, left and right. It's inherently it's a power law distribution in the music business. Um, so I think that's kind of the first part that I'm skeptical about, and the second part is that, and Chris, you and I have joked about this a bit, over Slack, but very often when I see articles about this or kind of these takes, it's from, and listen, I'm almost 40, so I put myself in this group, but it's from people who are like not teenagers and who are not, Gen Z or Gen Alpha. Um, I think to some degree we just don't know what's going on. And I put myself in that group, right? Like this was Brat summer. Chappelle Roan had a massive summer. Sabrina had a massive summer, and this isn't unique. I mean, Megan the Stallion has kind of owned two summers with a catchphrase over the past 4 years. So I firmly believe that music and even individual musicians kind of grip on popular culture is as big as ever. Again, I'm willing to be proven wrong if the data really is that different than how I see it, but I'm just skeptical. Yeah, I think, and again, the kind of elephant of the room, of course, is Taylor Swift. I mean, and of course, she hasn't become big in the last 2 years, but I mean, so much of this superstar discussion was happening when we were witnessing the largest tour of all time by orders of magnitude, right? So, and just, people flying from one city to another to go make a tour date. So, yeah, I still really believe that superstars are very much a thing, and that to a reasonable degree, monoculture is still a thing. I mean, again, I think about the summer that Charlie just had, and she was everywhere. She changed the campaign. I mean, it was just a cultural meme. So I do think that there are still things that break through. But it like we talked about earlier, there are way more voices trying to be heard now. So that is certainly a difference.
Yeah, and of course, this seems like, well, sort of, who cares how many superstars there are, but it seems like the underlying concern is that things become so fragmented that there's nothing culturally or artistically that we can all share. But as you're saying, just this last summer, we are still seeing these cultural moments that break through. And earlier this year, I mean, the biggest hip hop beef in how long between Drake and Kendrick Lamar.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, well, I would like to see a more comprehensive analysis to see maybe if there are actually less things breaking through. Matt in the chat just said or is suggesting there could be a difference between cultural moments and superstar moments. Are we galvanizing actual people, or do they just break through for a moment and then dissipate? I don't know the answer to that, but it's an interesting observation.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely a good point. I would, again, without having dove too deep into the data of this, I still feel personally, again, maybe I'm just biased or I'm not seeing it accurately. It still feels very similar to when I was growing up in that sense of, there would be artists in, let's say, 1999 who had a cultural moment, but who did not take that next step towards year after year success and, number ones and world tours. However we want to define a superstar, I think in the 90s, that was certainly how it was done. You were number one on Total Request Live on MTV, and, you were number one on Billboard. I'm just a little skeptical that kind of number of people who become superstars has changed. And again, I could definitely be wrong about that, but I think that with some of these artists, yes, I do recall when MTV played music. That was a special time. I used to love TRL. I mean, that was that is certainly something that has changed. And again, it's hard for me to pin down, has that changed or am I just older, right? So TRL now is TikTok, right? Kids go on TikTok every day and they see what the trending sounds are. I just think of that as watching a TV show, but is that different fundamentally, or is it just a different medium for that discovery? But yes, I do wish MTV played more music. That would be very fun.
So I feel like we've hit on some of the biggest issues that people talk about in music, and something you mentioned to me before this was, what issues do you think are flying under the radar, that deserve more attention? What do you think?
Yeah, I think you and I both have an interest in one of them, and we can keep the discussion pretty broad. But something that I think you and I have both been pretty vocal about with people in the industry over the past couple of years, is piracy is not dead. It's taking different forms. It's not necessarily peer to peer, LimeWire type apps, but there's been some crazy stuff going on in the app stores, in my opinion, with apps that don't have any license to stream music and commercialize music, and they kind of ride on top of YouTube and take out all the YouTube ads and stuff like that. And these are not long tail apps. These are, I mean, a lot of them were actually kicked out of the App Store, about a month ago. So it's an interesting time to be discussing this. But before they were taken out, I mean, one of them was larger than Amazon Music by downloads. I mean, it was the third most popular streaming app in the US. So this is not low level piracy or unpaid streaming, whatever you want to call it. This is having a tangible impact on artists and streaming platforms that are licensed and labels and indie labels and everyone. So we'll see. I believe one of those developers is actually suing Apple right now over their removal. So very much a evolving discussion. But I think that whether it's in the context of AI, whether it's apps that are just hijacking licenses from good actors, these are things we need to be aware of. And again, I think that a lot of people in the industry have this conception of piracy that is LimeWire based, right? It's like, well, that's not a thing anymore. And yeah, that's true, but there is a lot of uncompensated streaming going on, and that should be a focus. I think it should be a number one or number two focus for the industry.
Funny enough, there's an app right now that's quite popular in the Apple's App Store, music app. And same thing, I found my music on it, and I was like, I don't think I distributed my music to this platform. This was actually just today, and I reached out to them, and they were like, "Oh, actually, we just source all of our music from SoundCloud's API." And I'm like, that can't be allowed.
Don't think you're supposed to do that, especially if you're running your own ads. Yeah, not supposed to do
Yeah,
that.
and I don't think people realize, to your point, the scale of some of these apps where you have your household name music apps, Apple Music, Spotify, SoundCloud, Audio Mac, Tidal, even Deezer if you're in Europe. But there is this fleet of underground apps that are not compensating artists as they should, and they are tremendously, tremendously popular. And it seems like there's been a little bit of a reckoning with this over the last, I guess, month or so, but I'm curious to see how it shakes out, because I think it seems like we're just realizing how forceful and how large some of these apps are, even if they don't have that name recognition that your parents would know. But you know,
Yeah.
your
Well,
15
and
year
the
old not gonna
parents'
be.
point, yes, that to me is the really important part of this, which is I think the reason that a lot of folks at the executive level in the industry are not aware of these apps is they are used by almost exclusively people under the age of 18 or maybe 24, call it. But that's a real problem because I saw this during the Napster era where when you have a generation that gets this mental model of all music, every song ever released is free and I shouldn't have to pay for it. And I'm a supporter of ad supported streaming. We can talk about that as well. I mean, I do believe you need to give everyone who wants to play by the rules access to music. But when I say free, I'm talking about take whatever I want, no compensation to artists. Um, it is very hard once someone has that mental model to get them to value music again. And so I have a real concern over this generation that's coming up right now using these apps and then saying, why should I pay for Spotify? Why should I ever pay for Apple Music or YouTube or whatever? It's a generational problem for the industry, and it really needs to be. I think it's too late to nip it in the bud, but it needs to be stamped out as soon as possible because otherwise, I really do believe you're going to have tens of millions of people in this whole next generation that's supposed to be helping the industry grow. And again, not just the majors, we're talking indies, whatever. Um, and they just don't assign value to music. And I saw a lot of that kind of in the post Napster period, and it infuriated me. I mean, it was as someone who cared about music and as an artist, it made me very frustrated. So I'm kind of afraid that there's some of that happening again.
It's someone in the chat, Cash, just said, and it made an interesting point, but the next generation will pay for other mediums that use music. And you can tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think the comparison point is video streaming, where there are so many streaming services, and of course people share platforms, but it's like people are willing to pay for 10 different video streaming services. The price has increased year over year, and we haven't seen that same effect with music where Spotify goes up $1 and you have people yelling about it on Twitter. And again, $1 to access every piece of recorded or almost every piece of recorded music in the last 100 years. um, I feel like it's a day-to-day battle to build that relationship for people that music has value and deserves to be compensated for.
Yeah. Yes, I think to your point, I mean, I think a lot of folks in music have looked at the video streaming industry, which, to be fair, is going through its own reckoning right now, right? I mean, I think the price point that they got up to with everything being on different services has gotten unrealistic, and you're seeing a lot of kind of consolidation and correction there. So I'm not saying that's necessarily a sustainable model, but yeah, I mean, if you want every video or movie or TV show that's ever been made, I mean, I think you're talking about 100 something a month for Hulu and Netflix and Disney and the other 15 streaming services. And meanwhile, you can go on Spotify or Apple or Audiomack or YouTube and get basically every song ever made for around $10 a month. It seems to me to be a pretty amazing value. And yeah, it makes me sad when people don't want to pay that, or just don't think music has value.
But to your point, and something I know I guess I would say you're an expert on, is there are people out there that actually can't afford $10 a month for music.
Yeah.
Uh, whether that be the financial situation that they're in or they're 12 years old. We don't want to deny those people access to music. And how can we build a world where everyone can listen to music, but we can still compensate artists? And this is typically through an ad-supported model.
Yeah.
Do you think we're going to become more reliant on ad-supported streaming as the time goes on, and there are limitations to like how much people are willing to pay per month for an ad-free subscription?
I think there's some interesting things to think about there. Going back to video on demand, I mean, I think something that is really that I'm keeping a very close eye on in that business is, a lot of these ad-supported tiers for VOD, Netflix's ad tier is, I think, doing quite well revenue-wise. One of the VOD services, and I'm sorry I can't recall which one offhand, it might have been Hulu, but at one point I recall when I was at AudioMac reading that there was one of the video services where their ARPU, their revenue per user, was actually higher on their ad tier than their premium
Mhm.
tier. Now that's not common. That's definitely an outlier, but point being, I think you're seeing an industry that was solely really based around premium subscriptions now realizing that they do want to have that long tail, and there may be limits on it, on what you can watch or how much you can watch, or ad breaks and things like that. I support all those things. I also support, a creator. I would urge them not to do it, but again, being a former artist, if an artist feels like, hey, I don't want my stuff on an ad supported tier, I understand that. That in my opinion should be their right. But yeah, and I think the one anecdote that I would share here that I always try to get people thinking about, because when I talk to people about this issue, it's something that fires a lot of people up. And I think some people look at it as, if someone is not paying for Spotify $10 a month or $11 a month, it's because they don't want to. And that is absolutely true for a lot of people. I'm not going to deny that there's, tens or hundreds of millions of people who feel that way. But something that we saw at AudioMac, largely because of our ex-US audience, was something that I think we take for granted, where I am here in the States, is just about everyone in the US over the age of 18 at least has some kind of a card that they can use for payment, whether that's a debit card, a credit card, Visa, American Express, all the ones we know. And those are what are supported in the App Store for subscription payments. But once you get outside the US, especially when you get into emerging markets, LATAM, Africa, but even, parts of Europe and rest of the world, people just pay for things differently. It's mobile wallet. It's stuff that is not supported in the app stores. And so there are millions of people who literally just cannot pay, not because they don't have the money and not because they don't value music or want to compensate artists, but they literally cannot pay with the payment rails provided by the app stores currently. So that is something that I hope, both the technology providers address in the next couple of years. And I think it also needs to be top of mind at the labels, because I know, if you look at, for example, some of the recent forecasts of streaming growth in the years ahead, a lot of it is focused on ex-US growth. And I think there's a lot of potential there, but at the same time, people have to be able to pay. So
Yeah.
I think that's just a nuance that I've seen people not realize. And again, I didn't realize that before I worked at AudioMac, and I worked on that payment processing, and it just kind of opened my eyes to it's not always about, someone not being someone who values music. Sometimes they just literally do not have a payment method that's accepted. So we definitely need to try to bridge that gap, because that's just lost revenue for artists.
Yeah, and Tom in the chat was just asking more about Audio Mac, and I think just for context, Audio Mac exists. It's regular old streaming service, but it exists in this world where we have a ton of user generated content along with content from our label partner. So it's as much of I guess, an artist platform as it is a listener platform. And while it is popular in the US, as Dave was just saying, just tremendously popular in the Caribbean and Latin America and Africa, where the payment infrastructure is just dramatically different.
Yeah. I see Tom's question. I'm gonna have to keep my response to this one broad, but what I would say is
You want to
sorry
just
to
say what
repeat
it's
Yeah,
say what
yeah.
the
Sorry.
question
The
was.
question is, what do we think about major labels investing in AI companies? So again, I certainly can't speak to any specific label, but what I would say in general is AI is already such a broad category, right? You know, if it's investing in the kind of tools that I was talking about earlier, again, opt-in for artists, license training data, compensating artists, and it helps you take the guitar part that you have in your head, but just don't know how to play and make it amazing in your DAW. I fully support that. I'm really excited about that stuff. That's stuff that I wish I had when I was producing. I would have made better sounding music, to be honest. But so I think it really just depends on the use of AI. If it is let's scrape every song ever made on Spotify and not pay anyone, that would concern me. But I haven't seen those investments happening from the label side as far as I'm aware. I think where we have seen it's actually been labels trying to say you can't do that, which I appreciate. Um, but yeah, curious for Chris's thoughts as well.
Yeah, to me the whole thing with AI is like, again, I try to put it in the same plane as other technological tools, even though there is something intrinsically different about, say, comparing that to, the TR-808 drum machine. Um, but I think the importance is, and if it's going to benefit artists, is giving an artist an option to opt in or opt out. You don't want I don't want someone being able to train a model on my singing voice and have that sing any song. But if you wanted to do that, I mean, Grimes did something like that over the summer and it was quite successful. She was like, "Yeah, you can use my voice on any remix of this track. You just have to give me like 50% of the royalties or something like that." I think that's a very positive use of technology. It puts power in the hands of artists, and if labels invest in, my hope is that's the type of AI related technology that we invest in. Again, rather than, as Dave just said, let's scrape every piece of recorded music ever and give people access to it for free. Uh,
Yeah.
that's dangerous and probably long run isn't beneficial. But as you said, you can't completely, the cat's out of the bag to some degree. We can't stuff it back in. We have to work with it to some level as much as we might not want to.
I know we have a couple minutes left. I see Katie has asked a question here that I want to make sure we get to. To grow an artist audience, what are the pieces of data you think are most useful to track and target for improvement? How do you work towards improving those data points? Um, I I think it's going to vary a bit depending on the artist, and that's not me trying to give you a broad answer. It's just different artists have different goals. I think, if the artist is most focused on how do I make a living doing this? I've got to keep a roof over my head and I want to do music full time. I think they need to have a pretty keen focus on the revenue they're bringing in. So they might focus more on live performances or, something I saw a lot of producers that I was friends with do when I was producing was, make sound packs or sound design. That's kind of an additional revenue stream. So, but for a lot of artists, it's just I want more exposure. I hate the word exposure. It's often used to get artists to do things for free, but I want a broader audience, and I'm not too worried about monetizing them yet. I would focus on different things there. I think I can say as an artist that for some brief period, really felt a lot of people engaging with my music. When that is happening. It's a complete change from you're making music in your bedroom and nobody cares, and your music stinks like mine. Um, and you make something better and it really hits, and you get a lot of inbound, and you get a lot of that in those days it was my Facebook fan page, but you get a bunch of new Spotify followers or whatever you're kind of watching now. um when that shift happens, and I think that the scale of that engagement is going to be different for every artist. But I hope that answers your question, Katie. But for me, I just know that it I knew it when it was happening. It was kind of night and day, and sustaining that is a whole other challenge. And again, I found it very hard as time went on, and there was more and more music coming out to just sustain that interest because I felt like I was kind of getting drowned out by the algo. But that would just be my 2 cents.
Yeah, we at AudioMac, I work with a lot of the data. I work with data, and one thing we always look at is trying to find artists who are popping off before they are everywhere else. We want to see that in our data, and the signs that we see are just strong engagement rates. So higher levels of people saving your music to their library, people commenting, basically like a community that, as I said, is emerging around your music is what gives it power and what allows you to build a career. And that's sort of agnostic to platform era uh, technology. And it sounds old fashioned, but it isn't the truth. I mean, that's the stuff that does pop off. It's the things that inspire people to write comments, the things
Yeah.
that inspire people to save something to their library.
Um, I'm not sure if you guys saw me waving at someone. My boss just poked his head in my door. I need to be on a call in a minute. So I hate to say a quick goodbye, but I just wanted to say for everyone listening, thank you for taking an hour of your day to listen to us chat about music. Glenn, I'm not speaking at anything too soon, but I'll post on LinkedIn if I am.
Yeah, thank you for having us. And I write a weekly newsletter. I'll drop it here in the chat. It's all music, data, stuff that Dave and I talked about today and that we like to talk about frequently. So check that out if you want to keep up.
Guys,
And
thank you very much for everything you're doing to make a more democratic music industry. Appreciate all the work that you've put in thus far and all the cool things you're going to work on in the future. Thanks for being on the smartest people in the room. To the audience, I promised you'd leave smarter and more inspired than you arrived. I think we delivered on that brand promise today. We will see you here next week at the same time with Jordy Freed being interviewed by Jim Oswald. Meanwhile, be nice to each other. Go out and vote like your life depends on it. We'll see you soon.
Thank you
yeah,
all.
thank you.